Allied commanders were stunned by what German U-boats did off America in 1942. Section 1. Fire on the American coast. January 14th, 1942. Off Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. The Atlantic is calm, almost indifferent, its dark surface rolling gently beneath a pale winter moon. From the bridge of U-123, Captain Lieutenant Reinhard Hartigan raises his binoculars and scans the horizon. The smell of diesel exhaust clings to the cold night air. Somewhere ahead, faint but unmistakable, a line of lights burns along the American coastline. They should not be there. Hartigan lowers the glasses slowly. Hotels, boardwalks, street lamps, entire cities glowing freely against the Black Sea. The United States has been at war with Germany for over a month, yet the coast is lit as if nothing has changed. To Hartigan, a veteran of earlier Atlantic patrols, it looks less like a defended shore and more like a shooting gallery. Below decks, U-123 hums quietly, her diesel engines throttled back. The submarine has traveled thousands of miles from occupied France, slipping through the Atlantic in near silence as part of Operation Paukenschlag, Drumbeat, a daring plan personally approved by Grand Admiral Karl Donitz. The mission is simple in concept and terrifying in scope. Carry the war directly to the American coast before the United States can organize its defenses. Hartigan glances at his watch. Just after 7 p.m., a lookout reports smoke on the horizon. Hartigan turns his binoculars again. There, silhouetted perfectly against the coastal lights, a large merchant ship plows southward, unaware, unescorted, defenseless. Its black hull stands out like a target painted by the enemy itself. Alarm. Hartigan orders calmly. The klaxon shrieks through the submarine. Men move instantly, drilled and precise. U-123 slips beneath the surface, her hull groaning softly as pressure builds. In the torpedo room, sailors check firing mechanisms with gloved hands. This is not their first patrol, but it is their most audacious. They are operating within sight of America. Hartigan brings the boat to periscope depth. Through the eyepiece, the merchant ship fills his vision. SS Cyclops, American-flagged, steaming steadily along a route that should have been shut down weeks ago. No zigzagging, no blackout, no escort. At 7:53 p.m., Hartigan gives the order. A torpedo streaks through the water and strikes Cyclops amidships. The explosion tears through the hull in a blossom of fire and steel. A second detonation follows moments later, illuminating the coastline like a flashbulb. Flames rise into the sky. The ship lists sharply, then begins to sink. From the beaches of North Carolina, civilians stop and stare. Some believe they are watching a naval exercise. Others think it is an accident. Few realize that the war they have read about in newspapers is now burning just offshore. Hartigan watches through the periscope as lifeboats hit the water. He does not linger. U-123 slips away into the darkness, untouched, unchallenged. No American warship responds. No aircraft appears overhead. There is only the sea and opportunity. In Washington, Allied naval planners still believe the Atlantic battle is being fought far from American shores. British commanders, hardened by years of convoy warfare, have warned that U-boats will strike here if given the chance. Their warnings have gone largely unheeded. The U.S. Navy is stretched thin, its resources divided between the Atlantic and a rapidly escalating war in the Pacific. Coastal defense plans exist on paper, but implementation lags behind reality. That night, Hartigan sends a brief radio signal back to Germany. His message is concise, professional, and devastating in its implications. The American coast is exposed. Shipping lanes are wide open. Targets are plentiful. Within days, other U-boats arrive. U-66, U-109, U-130. Veteran commanders and newly promoted officers alike find the same conditions Hartigan encountered. Brightly lit coastlines, predictable shipping routes, and almost no coordinated defense. Merchant captains continue to sail independently, silhouetted against shore lights that turn every vessel into a perfect aiming point. German submariners begin calling it the second happy time. Between January and February 1942, ships burn off Florida, Virginia, New Jersey, and Long Island. Tankers explode in towering columns of flame. Oil slicks wash onto American beaches. Survivors drift ashore in lifeboats, telling stories that seem impossible. German submarines operating freely within sight of U.S. cities. In Norfolk, New York, and Halifax, Allied commanders read the reports with disbelief. The tonnage losses climb daily. British officers, veterans of 1940 and 1941, recognize the pattern immediately. The Americans, new to the brutal arithmetic of the Battle of the Atlantic, are stunned. Reinhard Hartigan stands on U-123's bridge days later, the winter wind cutting across his face as the submarine surfaces at night. Another set of lights glows ahead. Another ship moves along the coast, alone. For the men aboard U-123, the realization is sinking in. This is not a raid. This is an open door, and the Germans intend to walk through it again and again. Section 2. The second happy time begins. January 20th, 1942. North Atlantic, east of Cape Lookout. U-123 rides low in the water as dawn approaches, her decks slick with salt spray. Below, the crew moves quietly through the narrow corridors, exhaustion mixing with a growing sense of disbelief. They have sunk multiple ships in just days, and still no American warships have challenged them. No depth charges, no aircraft, nothing but open sea and burning wrecks. Reinhard Hartigan studies the chart table in the control room. Red grease pencil marks the coastline, each one a sunken ship. He has already exceeded expectations. Donitz had warned his commanders to be cautious, to conserve torpedoes, to expect resistance. Instead, Hartigan finds himself pacing his attacks, not out of fear, but because there are simply too many targets. On January 19th, U-123 torpedoes the British tanker SS Coimbra off Long Island. The explosion is catastrophic. Coimbra erupts in a fireball so bright it is visible from ashore. On the beaches of Southampton and Montauk, winter tourists and local residents watch in stunned silence as flames light up the night sky. Some cheer, believing it to be an American naval victory. Others stand frozen, unable to reconcile what they are seeing with the idea of safety at home. Hartigan watches through the periscope as the tanker breaks apart. He sees lifeboats drifting dangerously close to the burning oil. He notes the absence of escort vessels with professional detachment. This is warfare, and the opportunity is undeniable. That same week, U-66, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Richard Zapp, operates off the coast of Virginia and North Carolina. Zapp reports identical conditions. Merchant ships steam steadily along established routes. Navigation lights blaze. Coastal cities remain illuminated, ignoring blackout recommendations issued quietly and inconsistently by civilian authorities. German radio traffic increases. Messages flow back to Karaman U-boat base in Lorya. Donitz reads them carefully. The pattern is unmistakable. The Americans are unprepared for a submarine campaign at their doorstep. In private, Donitz reflects on the irony. The very nation that supplied Britain with escort doctrine and industrial support has failed to apply those lessons to its own coast. The German press is not yet told the full story, but within the U-boat arm, morale surges. Crews speak openly of easy patrols and rich hunting grounds. Veterans of the first happy time in 1940 shake their heads in disbelief. They had never imagined conditions this favorable could exist again, especially not against the United States. In Washington, the situation looks very different. At Navy Department headquarters, reports pile up on desks. Sinkings are logged, analyzed, and cross-referenced. The tonnage numbers are alarming, but explanations vary. Some officers blame individual merchant captains for negligence. Others insist the problem is temporary, a brief spike caused by a handful of enemy submarines that will soon be hunted down. Rear Admiral Adolphus Andrews, commanding the eastern sea frontier, requests survivors are rescued by fishing boats and brought ashore, wrapped in blankets, speaking of torpedoes and German voices echoing across the water. Newspapers begin to publish photographs of wreckage washed up on American beaches. The Atlantic War is no longer an abstract concept. British naval officers embedded in Washington exchange grim looks. They have seen this before in the Western approaches in the Irish Sea during the darkest months of 1940. They urged the Americans to adopt convoys immediately to darken the coast, to centralize command. Their advice is received politely, then delayed. Out at sea, German commanders sense that time is on their side. Fuel and torpedoes are finite, but the enemy's confusion is not. Hartigan notes in his log that American aircraft sightings are rare and poorly coordinated. When planes do appear, they often fly predictable patterns and lack effective anti-submarine weapons. Late one night, as U-123 surfaces to recharge batteries, Hartigan stands beside his first officer, listening to the gentle slap of waves against the hull. Somewhere ahead, another ship's running lights glow steadily. "They do not believe we are here," the officer says quietly. Hartigan says nothing. He already knows. Behind them, the submarine's radio crackles with new orders. Other U-boats are arriving. The hunting ground is expanding, and the realization is beginning to take shape among German commanders that this campaign, this shocking, almost effortless campaign, may change the balance of the Atlantic War, if only for a time. For the Allies, the shock is just beginning. Section 3. A Coastline at War. February 3, 1942. Off the coast of New Jersey, a cold wind sweeps across the deck of U-66 as Captain Lieutenant Richard Zapp peers through his binoculars. The shoreline is close, closer than any German submarine has a right to be. He can make out individual buildings, rows of lights stretching inland, reflections shimmering across the dark water. Somewhere beyond those lights, Americans are eating dinner, listening to the radio, living as if the war is still an ocean away. Ahead, a tanker moves northward, its navigation lights burning bright red and green. Zapp lowers his glasses and exhales slowly. He has seen the scene again and again since arriving off the American coast. It never loses its strangeness. Target bearing 095, the watch officer reports. Zapp nods. "Take us down." U-66 slips beneath the surface, the world narrowing to steel walls, dim red lighting, and the quiet tension of men who know the enemy is unaware. At periscope depth, Zapp aligns the crosshairs. The tanker's name comes into focus. SS Persephone, loaded with fuel bound for the northeastern ports. At 10:18 p.m., the torpedo hits. The explosion splits the tanker open, flames roaring skyward. Burning oil spreads across the water, igniting lifeboats almost as soon as they touch the surface. The fire is so intense it silhouettes the coastline behind it, turning the sea into a glowing mirror. Zapp watches only long enough to confirm the kill, then orders the boat away. Within minutes, the radio rooms of German U-boats up and down the coast buzz with activity. Sinkings are reported off Cape May, Charleston, Jacksonville, and the Florida Keys. The campaign is no longer confined to one stretch of shoreline. It is everywhere. In the United States, the psychological impact begins to rival the material losses. Newspapers print casualty lists. Survivors give interviews, describing torpedoes striking without warning, German submarines surfacing nearby, crewmen shouting orders in a foreign language. Oil washes ashore in thick black bands. Wreckage litters beaches that, only weeks earlier, had been symbols of leisure and safety. In New York, harbor pilots scan the horizon nervously. In Miami, hotel guests watch smoke rise offshore at night. Along the Outer Banks, fishermen speak in hushed tones of submarines seen through morning fog. Yet despite the growing evidence, coordination remains elusive. The U.S. Navy operates under a fragmented command structure. Coastal waters are divided into sea frontiers, each responsible for its own defense. Communication between them is slow and inconsistent. Escort vessels are few, many obsolete or underarmed. Aircraft patrols are sporadic, often flying without radar or depth charges capable of sinking a submarine. British officers continue to press their case. Convoys, they argue, are the only proven solution. But convoy systems require escorts, and escorts are desperately needed elsewhere. The Pacific War is consuming destroyers at an alarming rate. The Atlantic must make do with what remains. In mid-February, Rear Admiral Andrews finally authorizes limited convoy trials along parts of the coast. The results are immediate and telling. Ships sailing in groups suffer fewer losses. U-boat commanders report increased difficulty attacking escorted targets. But implementation is slow, uneven, and resisted by shipping interests who fear delays. For the Germans, February marks the peak of opportunity. Hartigan, now nearing the end of his patrol, reflects on the strange asymmetry of the campaign. He has faced more danger in the Bay of Biscay than off the American coast. His crew jokes darkly about the ease of the hunt, but beneath the humor is an understanding that such conditions cannot last. On February 11th, U-123 sinks its final ship of the patrol. Torpedoes are low. Fuel is dwindling. Hartigan sets course for France. As the submarine turns eastward, he takes one last look through the periscope at the fading coastline. Behind him, other U-boats remain on station. New commanders arrive, eager to test themselves. Among them are U-432, U-578, and U-203, each adding to the growing tally of Allied losses. Back in Berlin, Donitz reviews the numbers. In a single month, dozens of ships have been sunk. Hundreds of thousands of tons of shipping lie at the bottom of the Atlantic. The psychological blow to the Allies is immense. The Americans, so confident in their industrial power and geographic isolation, have been caught completely off guard. But even as the success reports pile up, warning signs appear. American aircraft sightings increase. Radar-equipped patrol planes begin to appear over previously unguarded waters. Some U-boats report being attacked, clumsily, ineffectively, but attacked nonetheless. The learning process has begun. For now, the balance still favors the hunter. But the hunted is waking up, and when it does, the Atlantic will become far more dangerous. Section 4. The Allies begin to understand. March 5, 1942. Washington, D.C. The conference room inside the Navy Department is heavy with cigarette smoke and frustration. Maps of the American coastline cover the walls, their edges crowded with pins and grease pencil markings. Each pin represents a ship lost. Each mark tells the same story. Torpedoes fire, sinking, often within sight of land. Rear Admiral Adolphus Andrews stands at the head of the table, his expression tight. He has been fighting this battle for weeks, not against German submarines, but against delay, skepticism, and institutional inertia. Now the evidence is impossible to ignore. In January and February alone, more than 100 Allied ships have been sunk off the American coast. The tonnage figures are staggering. Tankers, freighters, passenger ships, many lost with little or no warning. The newspapers have begun calling it a mystery menace, but there is nothing mysterious about it to the men in this room. They are operating with near impunity, Andrews says, tapping the map with a pointer. And they will continue to do so unless we change how we fight. Across the table, officers exchange glances. Some nod. Others remain unconvinced. Convoy systems, they argue, are impractical for the vast American coastline. Merchant captains complain about delays. Civil authorities still resist full blackouts, citing tourism and commerce. But the war is forcing decisions. That same week, the British Admiralty sends another sharply worded memorandum. Vice Admiral Sir Percy Noble, commander of Western approaches, writes bluntly that the situation mirrors Britain's darkest days of 1940. The solution, he insists, is equally clear. Convoys, escorts, and air cover implemented immediately and without exception. At sea, German commanders sense the shift. On March 7th, U-578 is attacked by an American aircraft off the others carry improved depth charges. Attacks are still inconsistent, but the sense of total freedom is fading. In coastal towns, blackouts finally begin to spread. Streetlights are dimmed or extinguished. Hotels draw their curtains. The coastline grows darker, denying U-boat commanders the silhouetted targets they have relied upon for weeks. Merchant ships are ordered to run without navigation lights, plunging crews into an unfamiliar and nerve-wracking darkness. For German submariners, the hunting becomes harder. Without shore lights, identifying targets takes longer. Approaches must be more cautious. Attacks that once seemed effortless now carry risk. Some commanders adapt quickly, using moonlight and radar detectors. Others struggle, their patrols yielding fewer results. Reinhard Hartigan, now back in France, reads the reports with interest. He is awarded the Knight's Cross for his success off America, celebrated quietly within the U-boat arm. But he knows the window is closing. The Americans are slow, yes, but not incapable. In mid-March, the U.S. Navy begins expanding convoy operations along the East Coast in earnest. Ships are grouped, schedules standardized, escorts assigned wherever possible. Old destroyers, Coast Guard cutters, even converted yachts and trawlers are pressed into service. They are far from ideal, but they are better than nothing. The effect is immediate. U-boats encounter convoys more frequently, and convoys fight back. Depth charges explode closer. Sonar pings echo through the water. Some submarines are forced to abandon attacks. A few are damaged, limping back to base with cracked hulls and wounded crewmen. On March 28th, U-85 is detected and sunk off Cape Hatteras by the destroyer USS Roper. It is one of the first confirmed U-boat kills in American coastal waters. The news spreads quickly through naval channels. For the Allies, it is a desperately needed sign that the tide can be turned. Yet the cost of delay is already immense. By the end of March 1942, hundreds of ships lie on the ocean floor. Tens of thousands of sailors have been killed or captured. Fuel shortages ripple through Allied logistics. The United States, newly entered into the war, has learned a brutal lesson in maritime warfare. For German command, the campaign remains a success, but an increasingly dangerous one. Donitz orders continued pressure, even as he acknowledges rising losses. The logic is relentless. Every ship sunk delays Allied mobilization, weakens Britain, and buys time for Germany elsewhere. As spring approaches, the Atlantic grows more hostile. Seas calm, skies clear, and air patrols extend their reach. The Americans are no longer stunned. They are adapting. And for the men aboard the U-boats, still prowling the coast, the realization sets in that the second happy time, this astonishing, almost unbelievable chapter of the war, cannot last forever. The hunt is no longer one-sided. Section 5. The tide turns beneath the waves. April 18, 1942. Off the Florida Straits. The night is moonless, the sea unnaturally calm. U-578 surfaces briefly to recharge her batteries, her conning tower rising just high enough to drink in fresh air. The engines rumble softly, a sound that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier this close to the American coast. Now, every moment on the surface feels like a gamble. Captain Lieutenant Heinz August Lenz scans the horizon. The coastline is barely visible, its lights dimmed by newly enforced blackouts. What once served as a glowing backdrop for easy kills has vanished into darkness. Somewhere above, unseen, American patrol aircraft are flying wider, more disciplined search patterns. A lookout suddenly stiffens. Aircraft noise. Bearing northeast. Lenz does not hesitate. Crash dive. The alarm bell clangs. Men scramble as U-578 plunges beneath the surface, ballast tanks flooding. Seconds later, explosions ripple through the water. Depth charges closer than before. The submarine shudders violently. Lights flicker. A gauge needle jumps, then steadies. This time, the Americans have come prepared. Across the Atlantic seaboard, similar scenes are unfolding. The U.S. Navy, slow to respond in January, is now throwing everything it can spare into the fight. Aircraft from the Army Air Forces join naval patrols, flying from hastily expanded airfields along the coast. Many crews are inexperienced, but they are learning fast, learning how to spot oil slicks, how to recognize the faint wake of a periscope, how to attack without hesitation. Convoys grow larger and more frequent. Merchant captains, once resistant, now welcome the protection. The sight of a Coast Guard cutter or an old destroyer plowing through the waves nearby brings a fragile sense of safety. It is not perfect, but it is something the U-boats must now contend with. In April alone, several German submarines are damaged or driven off their patrol areas. U-352 is sunk off Cape Lookout by the Coast Guard cutter USS Icarus, her crew captured and brought ashore, living proof to the American public that the enemy has been operating in their backyard all along. Photographs of the prisoners appear in newspapers, their faces young, exhausted, unmistakably human. For Allied commanders, the capture is a psychological victory as much as a tactical one. Interrogations confirm what intelligence officers already suspected. The Germans had been astonished by the lack of American defenses. The ease of the early months had emboldened them. That emboldenment is now being punished. German commanders report increased losses and dwindling success rates. The second happy time is giving way to a familiar reality, one in which submarines must stalk carefully, strike rarely, and evade constantly. Fuel consumption rises as boats are forced to spend more time submerged. Morale begins to shift, the earlier confidence replaced by tension and fatigue. In Berlin, Donitz studies the reports with a cold eye. He understands the pattern. This is the same cycle he has seen before. Early success followed by enemy adaptation. He orders adjustments, new patrol zones farther offshore, increased coordination with weather conditions, stricter radio discipline. But he also knows the truth. The American industrial machine is waking up, and once it does, it will be difficult to slow. By late April, the number of sinkings along the immediate coastline begins to decline. Losses do not stop, but they spread farther out to sea. The war is moving away from the beaches and back into the open Atlantic, where escorts and aircraft can operate more freely. For the civilians along the coast, the change is subtle but unmistakable. Fewer fires on the horizon, fewer bodies washing ashore. The newspapers shift their tone from shock to resolve. Editorials call for vigilance, unity, and sacrifice. The illusion of invulnerability is gone, replaced by grim determination. Aboard U-boats, still on station, commanders sense that they are now the ones being watched. Every sonar ping sends a jolt through the hull. Every aircraft silhouette triggers a dive. The easy days are over. And yet, despite the tightening net, the damage has been done. Between January and April 1942, German U-boats have sunk hundreds of Allied ships in American waters. The loss of life and material is staggering. The shock to Allied command structures has been profound. Hard lessons have been learned at terrible cost. As spring deepens into summer, the Atlantic campaign enters a new phase, one defined not by surprise, but by endurance. The stunned silence that greeted the first burning ships off Cape Hatteras has faded. In its place is the steady grind of a global naval war, one that will stretch on for years and claim thousands more lives. But for a brief, shocking moment in 1942, the German U-boat arm did the unthinkable. It brought the war to America and changed the course of the Atlantic battle forever. Section 6, The Reckoning of Command. May 22, 1942. Atlantic Fleet Headquarters, Norfolk, Virginia. Rain streaks down the tall windows overlooking the harbor as officers move briskly through the corridors. Charts are updated almost daily now, not with panic scribbles, but with measured, deliberate planning. The mood has changed. The shock has passed. What remains is resolve and accountability. Admiral Ernest J. King, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet, stands over a large table crowded with reports. King is known for his abrasive manner and unyielding standards, and the catastrophe of the early months has only hardened his resolve. The numbers in front of him tell a story he will not allow to repeat itself. The American coastline is no longer undefended. Outside, destroyers and cutters slide in and out of port at all hours. Their decks are crowded with newly installed depth charge racks and primitive sonar equipment. Crews train relentlessly, practicing attack runs and convoy maneuvers until muscle memory replaces uncertainty. At sea, the results are unmistakable. U-boat commanders report increasing difficulty even locating targets. Convoys steam dark and disciplined, escorted by vessels that react quickly and aggressively. Aircraft patrols overlap, creating zones of constant pressure. Submarines are forced to remain submerged for long stretches, draining batteries and exhausting crews. On May 29th, U-157 is sunk near Key West by aircraft from the U.S. Navy. The attack is swift, coordinated, and lethal. There are no survivors. It is a stark contrast to the fumbling responses of January. German radio intercepts pick up the change in tone among Allied communications. Confidence has replaced confusion. Procedures are standardized. Responses are immediate. The window that allowed the second happy time has closed. Back in France, U-boat crews returning from patrol look different than they did just months earlier. Gone are the casual jokes and swagger. In their place are drawn faces, sunken eyes, and stories of relentless pursuit. Mechanics work through the night repairing damage from near misses and depth charge attacks. Loss lists grow longer. Donitz convenes his staff. He acknowledges what every commander already knows. American adaptation has been faster than expected. Industrial capacity, once fully mobilized, is beginning to reshape the battle. New escorts are under construction. Long-range aircraft are coming. Radar and sonar technology is improving with alarming speed. Still, he presses on. The U-boat arm cannot afford to disengage. Every convoy sunk, every tanker destroyed, still matters. The Atlantic remains the decisive theater, and Donitz believes that sustained pressure, no matter the cost, can yet tip the balance. For the Allies, the reckoning is internal as well as external. Investigations quietly examine why blackout orders were delayed, why convoy systems were resisted, why British experience was discounted. Careers are damaged. Reputations suffer. But reforms take root. What was once fragmented is now increasingly unified. Along the coast, civilians adjust to a new normal. Blackouts are routine. Beach patrols scan the water at night. Observation towers the shoreline, manned by volunteers with binoculars and radios. The war is no longer distant. It is present, organized, and shared. By June 1942, the dramatic images that once filled newspapers, burning tankers, oil-soaked beaches, become rarer. Sinkings still occur, but they are no longer shocking headlines. They are grim reminders of an ongoing struggle, not symbols of helplessness. For Allied commanders, the lesson is indelible. Geography alone does not protect a nation. Experience cannot be ignored. War punishes complacency without mercy. The German U-boats had exposed every weakness in the Allied coastal defense system, brutally, publicly, and at terrible cost. But in doing so, they had also forced an awakening that would reshape the remainder of the war. As summer approaches, the Atlantic grows crowded with ships, aircraft, and intent. The stunned disbelief of January has hardened into determination. The battle is far from over. Section 7. The Cost of Awakening. July 9th, 1942. Off the coast of Cape Cod, morning fog hangs low over the Atlantic, turning the sea into a flat sheet of gray. An American convoy moves northward at steady speed, its ships spaced carefully, escorts weaving back and forth like restless sheepdogs. Sonar operators listen intently, headphones pressed tight, pencils hovering over plotting paper. Below the surface, a German submarine lies motionless. Its commander has been submerged for nearly 12 hours. Batteries are running low. The air is thick with sweat, oil, and carbon dioxide. Every man aboard knows the risk of surfacing in daylight, but remaining below much longer is impossible. When the submarine finally rises, only the periscope breaks the surface. Almost immediately, a lookout aboard one of the escorts spots the disturbance. Periscope wake, starboard side. The response is instantaneous. The convoy turns away as escorts surge forward. Sonar pings echo through the water, sharp and relentless. Depth charges roll from the sterns of two destroyers, plunging into the sea before detonating in violent, concussive blasts. The submarine reels. Lights shatter. Men are thrown against bulkheads. Water sprays from ruptured fittings. The commander orders emergency dives and course changes, but the net is tightening. This is no longer January. Across the American coast, similar encounters play out with increasing frequency. The learning curve has been steep and unforgiving, but it has worked. Allied escorts are now aggressive, coordinated, and persistent. A contact is no longer a fleeting opportunity. It is a commitment to hunt until either the submarine escapes or is destroyed. For German crews, the psychological toll mounts. Long patrols yield fewer successes and more close calls. Depth charge attacks come day and night. Aircraft strike without warning. Survivors of sunk U-boats speak of water pressure crushing compartments, of men trapped behind jammed hatches, of silence broken only by the groan of steel giving way. The loss lists grow. By mid-1942, the U-boat arm has lost a number of experienced commanders, men whose instincts and judgment cannot be replaced overnight. New crews arrive at the front with less training, less confidence, and fewer illusions. Donitz receives reports that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Entire patrols return without a single sinking. Others are forced to abort early due to damage. The American coast, once a hunter's paradise, has become a killing ground of its own. Yet the cost of Allied awakening is written in the sea. Between January and July 1942, German U-boats have sunk more than 500 ships in the Western Atlantic and Caribbean. Millions of tons of cargo, oil, food, raw materials are gone. Tens of thousands of sailors have been killed. The logistical strain on Britain and the Allied war effort has been severe. In London, planners calculate shipping losses with grim precision. In Washington, production schedules are revised to compensate for destroyed cargo. Shipyards work around the clock, their slipways crowded with new hulls. The American response is industrial as much as military. Liberty ships begin to appear in greater numbers, their welded hulls rising faster than U-boats can sink them. Escort carriers are laid down. Long-range patrol aircraft are rushed into service. The battle is shifting from survival to attrition. For Allied commanders, the memory of early 1942 becomes a cautionary tale, recounted in staff colleges and planning rooms. It is the moment when assumption met reality and reality won. For German commanders, it is remembered differently. They remember the lights along the coast, the burning ships visible from shore, the sense of disbelief that accompanied each unopposed attack. They remember how briefly the door stood open and how quickly it slammed shut. As summer deepens, U-boats are ordered farther offshore, away from the now dangerous coastal waters. The second happy time is officially over. The Atlantic War enters its most brutal phase, one defined not by surprise, but by relentless, grinding confrontation. The Allies are no longer stunned. They are fully awake. Section 8. Memory, Myth, and the Lessons Written in Steel. August 21st, 1942. Lorient, occupied France. A gray drizzle falls over the concrete pens of a U-boat base, streaking down walls designed to withstand bombs that have not yet come. A submarine eases into harbor, her hull scarred, paint blistered by salt and depth-charge concussions. The crew stands silently on deck as lines are thrown ashore. There is no cheering, no sense of triumph, only relief. Inside the pens, officers exchange brief reports. Patrol results are thin. Contacts were frequent, but opportunities were fleeting. American aircraft appeared without warning. Convoys were well defended. Several attacks had to be abandoned entirely. This is now the norm. In his office, Karl Donitz reviews the situation with a hard, practiced eye. He does not indulge in nostalgia, but he cannot ignore the contrast. Only months earlier, his commanders had described the American coast. Failures are acknowledged, if not always publicly. Training manuals are updated. The Battle of the Atlantic is no longer something that happens over there. It is a lived experience, etched into memory by burning oil and lives lost within sight of home. For the American public, the shock has faded into something quieter but more enduring. Coastal towns remember the nights when the horizon glowed orange. Fishermen remember hauling bodies from the water. Families remember telegrams delivered to front doors, informing them that a son or husband had vanished somewhere just beyond the shoreline. The war has left fingerprints on places once thought untouched. In Britain, the reaction is more restrained, but no less significant. The Americans have learned, painfully, what the British learned earlier, that the Atlantic is unforgiving and that neglect is always punished. The shared experience tightens cooperation. Intelligence flows more freely. Technology is shared more openly. The alliance grows stronger because it has been tested. For German submariners, the second happy time becomes a paradoxical memory. It is spoken of quietly, sometimes with disbelief, sometimes with bitterness. A period when the enemy seemed blind, when the ocean itself appeared to favor the hunter. But it is also remembered as a trap, one that encouraged risk, fostered overconfidence, and led inevitably to harsher reckoning. Young officers arriving at the front hear the stories and struggle to reconcile them with their own reality. They do not see burning tankers silhouetted against city lights. They see endless sonar pings, aircraft shadows, and the suffocating pressure of long submergence. For them, the war has always been like this. By the end of 1942, the strategic balance in the Atlantic is shifting decisively. Allied ship production outpaces losses. Escort coverage expands. The gap between sinkings and replacements narrows, then begins to reverse. The shock that once paralyzed Allied command has been transformed into momentum. But memory lingers. The events of early 1942 serve as a warning carved deep into Allied doctrine. Never again will assumptions replace preparation. Never again will geography be mistaken for defense. The cost of learning has been too high. When historians later write of the Battle of the Atlantic, the second happy time will stand out not just for its losses, but for what it revealed. It showed how quickly modern war could cross oceans, how rapidly complacency could be punished, and how adaptation, when it finally comes, can change everything. For a brief, chilling window, German U-boats did what few believed possible. They stunned the Allies. They brought the war to America. And in doing so, they reshaped the course of the Atlantic struggle forever. Section 9. The Silence After the Shock. December 31st, 1942. Atlantic Ocean, far from any coast. The sea is rough now, winter storms rolling unchecked across the open water. An Allied convoy pushes eastward under low, heavy clouds, its escorts maintaining tight formation. Radar screens glow softly in darkened combat information centers. Sonar operators listen, alert but calm. This is routine now. This is what the Atlantic War has become. Beneath the waves, a German U-boat shadows the convoy at long range. Its commander watches patiently through the periscope, knowing better than to rush. The escorts are too alert. The air patrols too frequent. One mistake could be fatal. He lets the convoy pass. This single, restrained decision would have been unthinkable a year earlier. By the end of 1942, the Atlantic has settled into a grim equilibrium. Losses continue on both sides, but the chaos and disbelief of early 1942 are gone. The Allies have absorbed the blow and responded with doctrine, industry, and relentless adaptation. What stunned them in January has hardened them by December. In Washington and London, planners look back on the shock of Operation Paukenschlag as a turning point. Not because it nearly won the war for Germany, but because it forced the Allies to confront their vulnerabilities immediately and without illusion. The cost was catastrophic, but the lesson was permanent. Convoys are now universal. Blackouts are automatic. Coastal air coverage extends hundreds of miles offshore. Intelligence, once fragmented, flows through centralized channels. When U-boats strike now, they face coordinated retaliation within minutes. For Germany, the moment has passed. The U-boat arm remains dangerous, disciplined, and deadly, but no longer decisive. Each patrol costs more and gains less. The experienced commanders in 1942 are gone, promoted, captured, or dead. New crews inherit a war that no longer favors surprise. Karl Donitz continues the fight, but even he understands the reality. The window that briefly opened off the American coast has closed forever. The Atlantic will not offer such opportunities again. For the sailors who lived through those first months, memory is sharper than statistics. American merchant seamen remember standing on deck, watching flames rise from ships that should have been safe. German submariners remember staring at illuminated coastlines, scarcely believing what they were seeing. British officers remember reading the reports with dread, knowing exactly what they meant. The shock of 1942 was not just operational, it was psychological. It shattered assumptions. It erased distance. It proved that modern war respected no shoreline. In later years, as victory becomes certain and the war recedes into history, those early sinkings off Cape Hatteras, Long Island, and Florida remain etched in doctrine and memory. They become case studies, warnings, and reminders passed down to future generations of naval officers. Because for a few astonishing months, the Allies believed the Atlantic was under control, and they were wrong. German U-boats exploited that mistake with ruthless efficiency, until the cost of surprise gave way to the power of adaptation. What followed was one of the greatest mobilizations of maritime defense in history. The Atlantic did not forgive complacency, but it rewarded learning. And from the wreckage of burning ships off America's shores in 1942, the Allies emerged transformed, no longer stunned, no longer blind, and ultimately no longer vulnerable.